You're low on health, sitting in the corner waiting for your supports to respond to your desperate cries for healing.
I need a doctor. I need a medic.
Unfortunately, Warriors on TikTok and Lucius on Reddit. After what appears to be an eternity, you decided to sneak your way to a nearby health pack and... It has always felt kind of silly to me the lack of recourse for a huge majority of the hero roster without access to readily available healing, typically from a support hero. The issue was most prominent prior to the official adoption of the role queue system, where teams foregoing a healing hero would be at such a severe disadvantage from the get-go that the game could be determined as practically over right from the hero select screen.
GG.
While the role queue system has somewhat alleviated the absence of healing capacity in a team, I would argue that it has not solved the core issue of what is essentially a necessity for most heroes in the roster to function on a basic level. A severe over-reliance on the support roster to provide healing, a power to provide which is largely monopolized within the aforementioned category.
Are you saying we should just give everybody healing and make support heroes obsolete?
Hear me out. Let's take a little detour and talk about one of the most defining aspects of Overwatch that distinguishes it from other first-person shooter titles. Hero synergies. These encompass both synergies within a role as well as between roles, such as with the Pharmacy combo, or the Nanoblade Ultimate combo, or popular tank combinations such as Reinhardt and Zarya, or not. One of the reasons cited by the developers for the removal of one tank with the new 5v5 role limit format is because
tanks can be problematic. A DPS hero is simple. They're shooting, but a tank has abilities that can be noisy, or when stacked with other tanks, can cause problems for other teams to try to overcome and counter.
So naturally, by barring the use of multiple tanks and tank synergies along with it, the developers could then open up the design space and balance tank heroes as independent units that don't rely on external coordination in order to function on a basic level, as the logic would dictate. Depending on whom you ask, the developers had varying levels of success in the implementation of this endeavor. However, I do think that in the final years of Overwatch 1, many veteran players can attest to the notion of tank heroes not quite living up to the fantasy of being this manifestation of aggression and durability. Or as some would put it, tanks in Overwatch 1 would explode, especially in an uncoordinated environment. Orisa is a pretty good example of this. Prior to her Javelin rework, she would deploy a stationary protective barrier that had a lengthy cooldown of 10 seconds. At one point, the barrier had a sizable base health of 900 points, but this was nerfed down to 600 in light of a synergy with Sigma, who when paired with Orisa would helm the oppressive double barrier meta that persisted right till the end of Overwatch 1. While Orisa played a crucial main tank role in those days, there was a severe over-reliance on coordinating an ability rotation cycle with Sigma and his abilities to fulfill that role, a dynamic of which the game balance would account for. But by doing so, it ensured that under Sigma's absence, it shed a light on Orisa feeling almost like half a hero, as under the focus fire of 6 enemy players, her barrier alone could be destroyed in less than a second. Fortify would then typically grant Orisa an additional 4 seconds of aggression time on the playing field before she would most likely be forced back into cover without assistance, as the lengthy cooldown of Protective Barrier does not facilitate a consecutive ability rotation cycle. As someone who's played quite a bit of Quick Play Classic solo tank Orisa back in Overwatch 1, it parallels to my personal experience of this, leading to quite a lot of downtime in her gameplay loop that one could argue is not befitting of a tank hero. Any attempts at trying to initiate engagements without her cooldown abilities would likely result in getting exploded. So instead, I spent a significant portion of my gameplay hours on Orisa, watching my teammates play the game instead. While I did actually have fun playing on Orisa back in Overwatch 1 for the challenge, I can also admit that the style of play required to function is counterintuitive to the whole immovable anchor tank hero fantasy that her visual design and role designation would otherwise imply. In light of the solo tank changes and her overhaul in the sequel, whether you're for or against the changes, I don't think it's controversial to say that the developers had a good degree of success in more closely aligning Orisa's visual design to her having a more consistently actionable front-lining hero fantasy where Orisa is now able to pull off her own ability rotation cycle without specifically having to rely on Sigma to enable her. The direction that Orisa's rework has taken is certainly reflected in the changes across the entire tank roster, as tank players are no longer compelled against their will to pick a specific tank hero at the hero select screen, based on the hero picks of their tank partners, just to enable a basic front-lining function. No longer do tank heroes play awkwardly if certain conditions beyond the control of a tank player are not met within the tank dynamic. The key takeaway here is that many of the changes leading into the sequel were targeted towards eliminating such elements of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness that induces a sense of loss of control amongst individual players, especially amongst tank players. However, such negative elements are not isolated within the tank ecosystem, and as we return to the topic of the video, I would argue that isolating the availability of healing to the support roster has created a similar, if not more severe stranglehold of frustration that tank players used to experience back in Overwatch 1. But this time, it applies to the playing experience of the entire hero roster. The introduction example is a demonstration of the frustration that a non-healing hero will face in the absence of readily accessible healing. Ideally, one should be able to re-evaluate the sequence of events leading towards being the subject of a successful elimination, and to identify lessons to take away from said sequence. However, I am really struggling to figure out what exactly are the lessons to be learned here in the demonstrated scenario. Say, Cassidy has already attempted to request for healing from his support players.
I need healing.
But they're off contributing to the team fight in a manner that they please. What is Cassidy supposed to do here? Is he supposed to just not take damage? Or if he's supposedly out of position, is the lesson here that he should just never leave the proximity of a nearby health pack and never play aggressively? But then how would the objective be played? He could simply swap to a more self-sufficient hero such as Tracer,
Hi there!
who has the mobility to feasibly and safely access a wider array of health packs at any point. However, that would run contrary to the mission goal altogether, as a hero swap of such would be induced by the very frustration we are trying to mitigate on a moment-to-moment gameplay basis. I suspect that many would default to the report button because
Moira isn't doing her job as a healer. I can't do anything, so this is gameplay sabotage.
but such a statement is analogous to reporting your off-tank player in Overwatch 1 for gameplay sabotage because he didn't pick Sigma and you're playing Orisa, therefore you couldn't do anything without him. If it is deemed a bogus logic to report a player over such a circumstance that will result in a sense of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness, then it also shouldn't be fair to report a DPS Moira for gameplay sabotage by contributing to a similar sense of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness. Because by principle, both the non-Sigma tank player and DPS Moira are still objectively contributing to the fight, even if not in the most optimally desired manner. There's a big design elephant in the room that is not being addressed here. In a sequel that is touted to emphasize individual impact, and this has been reflected in both the tank changes as well as the shift towards the 5v5 format. If steps have been taken to reduce the amount of frustration born out of interdependence in the tank ecosystem in retrospect to the new Overwatch 2 design philosophy, why haven't such steps been taken to address the over-reliance on the support role to provide healing for the entire hero roster? Thus far, we have discussed the state of non-healing heroes when subject to the lack of recourse without access to healing. However, I would argue that in the very same context that those feelings of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness are actually the most amplified amongst the support roster and their players. Let's tackle the DPS Moira example first. It's not a coincidence that specific heroes in the support roster are frequently utilized and widely criticized for the kind of behavior exhibited in the demonstration. For instance, you are most unlikely to encounter Mercy players attempting to challenge Soldier 76 in the enemy backline.
Hello.
So there must be something about the hero design of Moira and other support heroes such as herself that enables, if not incentivizes, these behaviors, with Moira herself being the biggest culprit. If we take a look at Moira's kit, her primary fire is a closed-range, resource-limited healing ability that requires her to use her longer-range secondary fire with unlimited ammo and forgiving aim requirements to refill said resource. Right from the get-go, damaging enemies is presented not just as an added benefit, but a mandatory aspect of Moira's gameplay loop. On top of which, it is actually more conditional for Moira to heal than to damage. Then if we look at a Biotic Orb ability, once again it is observed that both healing and damage are part and parcel to the thematic duality that ultimately defines the hero of Moira and her gameplay loop. And specifically for Moira, Damage Orb is the only support ability on cooldown whose sole functionality is doing damage. On paper, it would seem like Moira is a hero that almost should be doing damage more often than healing. It's safe to say that the hero design intentions of Moira and other support heroes such as herself do not run a perfect parallel to the narrative of support equals healer. It is intentionally built into the design of these heroes that healing may or may not be available based on the circumstances that may or may not be controllable. However, with the label of support comes an expectation from both the developers and the community for such heroes to perform healing as their first priority, which when combined with the support role's near monopoly on healing as a mechanic, makes this expectation one that runs contrary to what is fun and intuitive for players of support heroes of such hybrid natures. It's almost like these players are not allowed to fully lean into aspects of the fantasies of these heroes they want to play, despite having the technical capacity to do so, resulting from the social pressure of holding the entire team's healing capacity hostage. As we return to our introduction example, our friendly but dead Cassidy player wouldn't be too pleased with the cards he's been dealt with. Moira successfully eliminates the enemy Widowmaker, but has made a few new enemies in the process, in the form of her teammates. She can now either go back to her team and start spraying her dehydrated excretion, something which she clearly wasn't very fond of doing up to this point, or she could double down on her social media adventure and run the risk of getting reported. And this is the type of social dilemma and pressure that the developers had sought to address in the sequel with regards to the playing experience of tank heroes by making ability changes that enable for more selfish plays. Or to frame it more generously, this is leaning into how players actually want to play the game. By removing a tank player from the role queue distribution, tank players wouldn't have to choose between picking their favorite tank hero or the most synergistic tank hero. By reworking tanks into more of a fat DPS flavor, they are no longer bound to protection duties and can lean into a level of aggression that arguably a significant majority of the player base would be more compelled by. We can dispute whether or not these were the perfect solutions to the original tank problem, but the problem was recognized and an attempt at a solution was made. Considering that such a sense of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness persists with regards to the problem of healing, and that this practically affects the entire hero roster, this issue should likewise warrant an attempt at a solution, and the developers wouldn't have to look very far to do that. The solution is already implemented. Partially. With the support role passive, all support heroes receive automatic health regeneration after not taking damage for 1.5 seconds. I think a lot of support players, myself included, can attest to how this passive has had a really positive impact on their playing experience in the role. And as a Brigida main myself, I'm glad to not have to risk life and limb to trigger my Inspire passive just so I can heal myself for the last 25 damage I took. The developers took special note of Anna, who has this to say.
I always feel like you're an auto players, obviously when you're really low, you're like, I guess I'll nade myself, but sometimes you're missing like 50 health and you're like, am I gonna waste my nade just to heal myself? Where's my other healer?
It is important to note that these awkward and frustrating dilemmas stemming from the decision to heal oneself are coming from a role of heroes that hold the overwhelming amount of healing resource in the game. If Ana players are already struggling to convince themselves to press E to heal themselves, imagine being Cassidy having no way to heal himself, trying to convince someone else to press E to heal him.
I need healing.
No.
And you wonder why Overwatch players are toxic. This philosophy of support equals healer was further reinforced or cemented when the only non-healing support hero in the history of Overwatch was removed from the category because she didn't heal. This support hero design philosophy has only doubled down since, as every support hero today has the ability to provide readily available healing, and only them. Interestingly, despite having the greatest number of healing abilities, and this could be a devil's advocate argument, why are support heroes the finalized recipients of a role-wide health regeneration mechanic, when they can already heal themselves most consistently, unlike heroes of any other role? I suspect the aforementioned design philosophy is the culprit behind such a developer decision, but one that would unfortunately cultivate an environment of toxicity against support players that don't fall under the mold of being a heal bot. If the goal is to reduce the amount of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness in the gameplay experience of all players, and if the support role passive has had a positive impact on the playing experience of support players, wouldn't such a mechanic be befitting of not just the support role, but the entire hero roster itself? Now of course, we're not advocating for a one-to-one port of the support role passive to the entire hero roster, but the concept of a universal health regeneration mechanic fixes a lot of problems. And we can identify some resolutions right here with our introductory example. Under this implementation, if Cassidy is sniped by Diva pellets from across the map, he could certainly re-evaluate the sequence of events leading towards being the subject of a successful elimination, and there would be lessons to take away from said sequence, as we can now identify that Cassidy was not in a situation without Recourse. He could have stayed out of combat and recouped enough health over time to eventually re-engage into the fight. In the absence of a healing support, Cassidy can still take damage in an engagement and not be rendered handicapped for an indefinite remainder of his existing lifespan due to a specific inaction of a separate player on his team. Levels of aggression can now be adjusted with a trade-off of having larger spans of out-of-combat downtime, rather than being stuck near a health pack's location or not engaging at all. This empowers players towards maximizing their individual performances in their given circumstances, rather than resorting to mic and text chat shenanigans, because there would be no out-of-combat instances whereby an individual player is truly helpless. A friendly DPS Moira player here could also appreciate having the burden of half the team's healing capacity lifted off her shoulders, as said capacity is now no longer pigeonholed unconditionally into a presence. We can actually feel the effects of this video's proposal in the current live game to a smaller degree within the support ecosystem itself. As a Brigitte player, the support role passive allows me to conserve my repair pack charges while my NR teammate is not at full health but is staying out of the enemy's line of sight. This allows me to use my repair packs when it should really matter. Mercy players could also likely attest to not having to detach their damage boost beams from the damage partners just to heal a support teammate who is not actively in danger. By applying this health regeneration mechanic to the rest of the hero roster, what we are doing here is really extending this feeling of freeing up moments of monotonous obligations in favor of playmaking opportunities. But in doing so, we are also freeing up the support hero design space that the developers could be working within.
Healing and hurting. I guess we're not that different.
I assure you we are nothing alike.
We are currently at count number 3 for support heroes running with the whole left-right damage and heal theme that, let's be honest, is getting pretty old. Under the design philosophy of support equals healer, signs are showing that the well of possible support hero designs is running dry. The design of Kiriko's healing is a great demonstration. Back in January, Kiriko's recovery on her healing Ofuda was nerfed under the rationale that her healing output was higher than the developers had originally intended, and that they wanted Kiriko to spend more time doing damage than healing. However, many in the community agreed that this has led to Kiriko's healing feeling clunky, and that there was a general sentiment that the developers were trying to push Kiriko into an offensive playstyle that her design simply didn't facilitate. The question is, if the developers had intended for Kiriko to be an offensive hero, why was her healing Ofuda designed this way in the first place? You might have guessed it. Support equals healer. The fact that healing Ofuda is currently tuned to be clunky by design, so as to encourage players to facilitate the developers' hero fantasy of Kiriko, shows just how limited the predominant support hero design philosophy is, and just how much damage it has done to the potential of existing support hero designs and beyond. Because under this philosophy, every support hero must be able to provide healing on demand, since no other role of heroes can heal themselves reliably whatsoever. On top of which, the developers are clearly doing their best to mix things up with every new support hero addition to the game, and healing Ofuda was one of such attempts. Although, if we think hard enough about it, Kiriko's healing Ofuda is kind of like if Brigitte's repair packs were not on a cooldown but are slow, clunky, and blocked by walls. Or it could be Mercy's healing beam but projectile based, 20 meters longer, and clunky. I can't help but feel they ran out of ideas. And I don't blame them for this. At least not in the context of abiding to the predominant support hero design philosophy that both the developers and the community holds dearly. After all, how many ways can a support hero heal their teammates in some mind-bendingly unique fashion of their own before we start seeing some major design overlaps? Rather than replicating existing healing mechanics onto new support heroes and then making them different. By instating a universal health regeneration mechanic, the power budget of the support role could shift away from constant healing and towards playmaking opportunities. Once again, we can actually observe to a smaller degree the effects of this proposal under the current kit design of Kiriko, being the first support hero built with a new role passive in mind. Without the passive regeneration, Kiriko would demonstrate a severe lack of capacity to heal herself, as Protection Suzu can only heal for 50 health points, at a low 25 health and without external support. Kiriko would need 4 cycles of Protection Suzu, or a minimum of 56 seconds to fully restore her own health. It's apparent that Kiriko's kit design wouldn't have been a very feasible one if not for the implementation of the support role passive, that of which circumvents the requirement to possess a self-healing ability and therefore freeing up the design space for non-healing centric support utilities in place. It stands to reason that if the support role passive, which as of now applies to 40% of players in the match, has had already such a dramatic impact on making hero designs such as Kiriko's current kit a reality, that to apply this mechanic to the other 60% of players would be to potentially lift an even greater burden of having mandatory constant healing abilities on support heroes, and thus empowering new ways of designing said heroes. Maybe then we wouldn't have to count to the number 4 for yet another one of these. This video has gone on long enough, so to end the topic, if we're leaning into how players really want to play their heroes, and if we're willing to make sweeping changes such as role passives, the 5v5 format, and major tank reworks to reduce the sense of awkwardness, frustration, and helplessness that can be experienced from moment-to-moment gameplay, implementing an out-of-combat universal health regeneration mechanic is a simple solution that falls in line with this mission objective, and with evidence in the existing support role passive proving its efficiency within the support ecosystem to fulfilling this mission.